How are you? Welcome to Critical Moves of Telesur. When everything seemed that, regardless of the pandemic, the major powers would retake the negotiations to de-escalate their tensions in the midst of accusations that are sent by the White House against the huge Asian country. Why does the Trump administration decide to withdraw and give zero hope of getting closer? Is China who wins, as the White House says, once the taxes are withdrawn? To what point is the United States the victim of all of this? Let's display this. Let's hear statements from both sides. No, I'm not interested. An agreement was signed. I heard that China would like to reopen the negotiations to take advantage of things. China has taken advantage of the United States for many, many years, for decades, because we had people here where I'm standing that allowed that to happen. As we've said before, all of the countries in the world have established agreements with mutual interests. So the nature of the economic relationship with the United States is the same. In the recent years, the capital markets of China have become vital, and among those, United States. This shows the trust of the international investors and the development is stable of China, and how they recognize that the reforms and how the opening of the market is going on. If the United States keeps on obstructing the investors of U.S. investors in China, because apparently that puts at risk the security of the United States, they are totally against the laws of economy, and that would only make them lose opportunities. It will go against the interest of the U.S. investors. Both countries should defend the interest of self-respect. The negotiators of China and the United States held a negotiation on TV last week, and the parts expressed that they should make more effort to make good conditions to implement the first phase of the economic and commercial agreement. That is vital. Let's see a mapping of two concepts that have been basic for the economic policies of the United States and China. Protectionism and cooperation. Donald Trump reached the White House by selling the idea that he was going to bring back the rights of the working class. However, during the 4 years of his government, those who have benefited most are the multimillionaires. President Trump has used three things: cut taxes, that has been one of the biggest one in the tax system in decades. Two, demantalizing some industries, and the ones that were benefited was the financial and the energy. The third one, protectionism. Although they said that they were going to help all of the workers because he said they were victims of the importations. This was not the case, because for every importation that Trump blocks, the countries do the same with U.S. exportations. The U.S. economy is having a very strong decrease in the midst of the COVID-19. On the other hand, if you see the registers of unemployment, there is a big reduction of the numbers. However, what is really happening, economists consider that this is against what Trump is saying. And it's because many have stopped seeking for jobs, and that's why they don't appear in the numbers as unemployed. Plus, the numbers were decreasing before he became president. On the other side, we have Xi Jinping. He has an excellent relationship between the economy and the government. Xi has defended publicly the law of economy, which is opposed to the protectionism of the United States, thus maintaining the second largest economy and the path to a biggest growth. The president has shown many focuses on how to increase everything that China does. This has also the principles of sharing, open, environmentally friendly, and this will be the new normality and a structural reform. The quality of life of the Chinese has increased with an increase of their per capita income. The country has reduced their environmental contamination, and with their initiative of the route and the Asian Bank of Investment, China has shared for the last years, along with other countries, using their own technology, their own experience, and their own capital, how to reduce poverty. Let's see how the tensions have been going on with the United States and China amidst the pandemic. Ever since the pandemic exploded in the United States, the government of Donald Trump went against China, accusing them of withholding information about the origin of the COVID-19. President Trump and other authorities have referred to the pandemic as the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, and other words that try to seed the idea that the origin of all of this came from China, and therefore China is the culprit of all of the consequences. Trump has accused the government of Xi Jinping of withdrawing information of the coronavirus. Through his Twitter account, he has questioned the numbers given out by China, saying that they're much higher. Along with this, Trump says that China has not answered in a proper way to this pandemic. Of course, this goes against all of the conventions, international conventions like the WHO, against which Donald Trump has also spoken out. Against the WHO, Trump has said that they're gonna withdraw all the monetary support. On their hand, China says that they have been transparent, and last February, United States went against Chinese journalists, and in this line he invited 5 news media, saying that they could stay in the country, but of course they would have to register as foreign press. China has answered to all of this by doing the same with the news correspondents of the United States in Peking, like the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. According to a statement issued by the Foreign Affairs Department, this is in the need of answering an irrational offense on behalf of the United States, based on a Cold War idea. According to the spokesperson, the White House tries to induce panic. He says that everything that Washington has done is to enforce fear. China demands that all of these conspiracy theories be put to an end. Repeatedly, Peking had called on Trump to put the COVID in the hands of the scientists and put all of their effort in combating this pandemic that has already more than 1 million, almost 1.5 million victims. However, Washington authorities ignore these calls, and they keep on accusing China of cyber spying because they're trying to steal information about vaccines. Let's do an overview of digital website. Here we have China rejects the accusation of stealing of information of vaccines for COVID-19. This is from Hispan TV. China refutes the accusation of the FBI that they're using hackers to take over the information that the United States has. The CISA has issued an alert sent to U.S. authorities that are carrying out investigation of COVID-19, which they alert that there is a group of hackers that are supported by China to steal the information they have. This was informed by the New York Times. In reaction to this threat, China has underlined that the FBI and the CISA has launched this accusation with no evidence whatsoever. The Chinese delegation has said that all of these are lies, and they accuse Washington for going against the international information and be able to protect people. Let's not forget that Trump has even called the COVID as a Chinese virus. And he has said that China has created this virus in Chinese labs. However, this has been refuted and proven that not to be so. Let's see what Telesur says. Telesur says China could sanction people and entities of the United States. China is sick of all of the abuses of the United States against their country because of the COVID-19, and this is why they will put sanctions against people, entities, and public servants of the United States. This was said to sources near to the Global Times. And they said that this will be included, many people will be included. Yuan Sheng, who is an investigator of the Chinese Social Science Academy, says we must take measures against those politicians who are trying to cut the relationship between two countries for their own interest. There have been many demands in federal courts of the United States by congressmen and statesmen that are also Republicans. Some other Republicans have presented projects of law so they can demand China. Although there is no real possibility for the United States be able to obtain their objective. I would like to suggest this article that says China is pushing for the loss of the United States. This was published in Hispan TV on May 6th. It was written by Pablo Jofre Real. It says, the Chinese power and economic and political international influence, and again, and above all, the prestige it has against the United States, is now the object of all of the attacks of Washington that says that what they hate is that they are no longer the king of the world. United States consolidates after the destruction of Europe and Japan their trademark of superpower, and with this they want to confront the new world order centered on interests. This is why all power of United States is focused on 800 military bases and air bases, invasions, either to help governors that they like or go against presidents they don't like, to install political institutions like the Zionism so they can create different leaders that they favor, to go over international economic organizations. In a country where the president is not, the presidents are normally not so intelligent, they accuse China of being the culprit for the COVID-19. The answer to all of this and trying to blame China radicates in economic and commercial factors. When the superpower of the United States is being questioned right now, China has gone all in Africa with 250,000 workers, thousands of companies, and investments that go over 85 million into $400 billion right now. This is a similar way that China has done in Latin America, along with the global decrease. This will explain the policy of Donald Trump and why he is pointing at China. Donald Trump, while being elected, made it very clear that our enemy is China, and this is how that he has gone through with it, even creating an anti-Chinese sentiment. While the infections and the deaths are constant in the United States, the attacks in China will intensify. For Trump, the search of an enemy that hides their awful administration is priority. Let's update information with our correspondent in China, Iranzi Peraza. Hello, Iranzi. Greetings, colleagues, and thank you for the contact. In fact, in the midst of this new rhetoric of threats and confrontation between China and the United States, they agreed on creating better conditions to implement the first phase of the commercial agreement that could lead to the end of the conflict between the two superpowers. This news arrived in the middle of as a surprise, because many thought that due to all of the friction between China and the United States could go to the commercial land and do without this first phase. Let's not forget that the international markets are already very much affected because of the COVID-19, and this decision has many ways of reading it. Many experts have already said to the White House that this is the moment when the country has the largest numbers of unemployment ever since the Great Depression. It would not be the best moment to restart a commercial war with China, with over 1.5 affected people. And let's not forget, more than 83 deaths and 33 million people unemployed. The COVID-19 has affected the economic growth of the United States, which was one of the main pillars of the re-election of President Trump. And we must also recall that in the first phase of this commercial agreement, there was a commitment of China to increase the importation of U.S. goods for over 200 billion over 2 years. This, according to experts, could help China, but of course, it would mainly help the U.S. economy. On their behalf, Beijing has always said that they don't want a conflict with the United States, but China seems to be better prepared to confront this COVID-19 pandemic. And although the pandemic has had negative effects on the huge Asian country, authorities think that this is temporary and they will be able to overcome all of the effects of the COVID-19. Let's not forget that another thing that goes against the negotiation are the aggressions of Trump against China, and this at some point could make the Chinese president lose his head and do away with the commercial agreement. Of course, this would bring great complications for these two superpowers, but also for the rest of the world that are already very much hit by the COVID-19. Up until now, this is all. Let's go back to studios. Thank you, Iramsi. Let's go to our first pause. But don't forget that we have the question of the day through which you can participate. Today says, the United States considers that it's not highly probable to take back the negotiations with China. How much do you think he's going to maintain this policy of blaming China for everything that happens? Give us your opinion. We'll be right back. We continue going through our analysis, United States and China. As you might recall, January of this year, there was a commercial agreement that was a truce in the so-called tax war that was begun by the Trump administration. Let's go over the most important points. The document known as Phase 1 was signed by President Donald Trump and the Vice Prime Minister of China. There we have things like technological exchange, financial, currency, commercial expansion, disputes resolution, and there was also thought of mentions of piracy and violating authors' rights. Both countries would work together in the regulation of currency and to stop the currency from going down. They also accept that no country could denounce the other if what is packed is not respected. However, there will be no repercussions if anything they do is done in good faith. The first phase of this agreement establishes that China will buy every year even 50 million industrial articles from the United States during the next 2 years in exchange to reduce the taxes. However, President Trump said that they will keep the taxes to the Chinese articles, but they will only lift them once phase 2 is already finished. Although the parts found a way to evaluate and find dispute resolutions, China has many things pending, like the subsidies of China in certain industries, and cybersecurity, where the main attention has to do with advancing. China has its forefront in Huawei company. Let's begin an analysis. We have Julio Jamina. He's an expert in world economy. And we also have with Marcelo Ramirez. He's the director of Asia TV of the political sector. Welcome both of you to our space of critical moves. Dr. Gambina, we see that when everything was thought to be solved amidst the pandemic, when I was speaking of solutions, I spoke of a friendly solution among the United States and China. Donald Trump decides to withdraw and says, no, with the author of the Chinese virus, we cannot sit to negotiate. What do you think? Well, I think the explanation can be found in the electoral campaign of the U.S. and in the fact that there is a common thought among the people of the United States. They are very critical against China. I don't know if Donald Trump is going to use all of the possible arguments to try to have the votes. And let's not forget that his second mandate is very risky. He might not win, but he will do everything. He will use every argument, regardless of what happens, what under his management has happened in the United States. Now, United States has more deaths than originally China had. So it's 16 or 17% too of unemployment, that probably by the end of the month it will be 20%. And the population is not going to vote for Trump because of economic discontent. So what Trump needs to do is to find more satisfaction with the electorate. So now he's going at any argument possible to try to win the electorate. One of those is the opinion that has been sowed in the U.S. population against China, and in this nationalism of the United States, that America first, that is pushed by the United States. They keep on trying to exploit the argument of the Chinese responsibility for the COVID-19. I think Donald Trump is an unpredictable character in the world spectrum, and I think that what's risky is that he might not only stay in argumentation, but he could even go further and try to confront with China on different different fronts, such as the military. So I think it's very concerning, this back and forth of the U.S. economy, especially in the conflict with China. Thank you, Doctor. We will continue expanding these ideas. Now, Marcelo, I want to thank you for having accepted our invitation. One of the reasons, if not the main one, that the United States said they will not sit to negotiate with China because, according to them, China is not reliable. And what we see is that China is advancing in the fight against coronavirus. They are restarting to reopen their economy. And this is totally different to what's going on in the United States. What do you think? Well, I think this crisis reveals is the fragility of the United States. Now, United States has shown their lack of capacity in the health front. And let's not forget that the people are rejecting everything that Trump is doing because the middle class sees that they're losing their economic capacity. And all of the American industries that have collapsed. And so this means that the U.S. economy is much weaker than it seemed to be. We see that China has surpassed the United States in many aspects. And on the other hand, China shows a society that the Chinese society has been very efficient in this crisis. They've been able to take very hard measures, but they've been able to stand on their feet much faster than the United States. And if there's a new wave of the COVID, they know exactly what to do. But so United States, what he has to do, well, Trump particularly, is to again go against an enemy. And what he needs is to find somebody to point the fingers at and be able to say that he's not responsible, but somebody else is. So apparently they're going to reach 100,000 deaths, and of course there are over 1 million infected. So now the balance of the situation is changing. We see that while the United States at the beginning wasn't so willing to sign this economic agreement, now it's China who is doubting. So now China is seeing with distrust things because the United States is not in any condition to offer anything. Marcelo, what you just said is very important. What do you consider that how the world sees what Donald Trump says about China and vice versa, with the Chinese position? Well, I think there's an information war. And in that sense, the United States has a great advantage because you've got some countries that are allies to Washington. But of course, let's not forget that within the United States, Trump does not manage the news media. So this is something that makes it difficult to put his message through. And China, on the contrary, is just raising their voice on things that are very obvious. So what we're not sure is the origin of the COVID-19. But all of the situation is a communicational war that at the end only responds to a difference of models. The United States is in the midst of a collapse, and while so in some way this commercial war, the fall of the of agreements, the problem is that the reaction to this pandemic was unthought for. And of course, this is complicating his possibility of re-election. So anything that goes against his project, this will, he might sink. However, China is very comfortable with all of their gears in place. They're just seeing what the definitions of the United States are. But China is totally trustworthy. Thank you, Marcelo. Dr. Gambina, Marcelo was speaking about a campaign supported by the United States. And here let's talk about the news media that works along with Trump and the others who don't. Where is the success of this, where the news media is adverse to the White House? But however, now they get together and they speak of the so-called Chinese virus, and they give it to Trump very well served. Well, I think it's a diversity of topics that must be considered. First, the news media, which are sent all over abroad. And whatever you think of China, things are working for them. I think China is the enemy that you have to beat now. Let's not forget that in the G20 summit held in Argentina, there you could see there was a consolidation of the relation of the U.S. and China, and the intention to show that now there are new ideas of a Cold War. United States and the Soviet Union want to create an imaginary truth. That from this standpoint of the political. But then there's another big problem. Is what has been called the neoliberal policy. That began in South America at the beginning of the 70s, and that expanded throughout the multilateral system. So due to this form of paralyzation and the display of the internationalization of the capitals, this is why there is a crisis, and this is why United States investments should go back to the United States, or the answer is, if we want to leave the European Union and create the conditions of real establishing for a place like of Great Britain in the world scenario, I think those are not lesser topics. And those who have supported Brexit and Trump are those who have been affected, because the world globalization is going to leave many behind. So I think it's a very complex topic. It's not an easy one. Because if we would want to make a simple analysis, you could say that Trump is very dumb to lead the destinies of this big country. However, there is something at the base, which is the social consensus, that allow him to have the illusion of running for a second election. You can only imagine the support of the great part of the majority that are totally discontent with the effect of the globalization that has been generated in the last weeks in the United States. This is when this is what the U.S. government is going to give them. And the news media are totally opposed to this strategy. And they have an enemy against through which throw rocks. So you can understand me. In terms of hopeful expectation that the yellow vests created in France or in Chile, these were two expressions of two continents. People who were drawing and then they smeared this. So I think that it's important to see this complexity and add, I would not underlie the problems that exist in China themselves, because although China has better conditions to overcome the current recession, let's not forget that the expectation of growing of China is way beyond their historical average. Let's not forget that China also needs the situation of economies open, because China is a great provider of the world service, just like factories. So I would say that it is a very complex time. And in this complexity of political, ideological, and economic disputes, it's important to see the situation of the world now. Thank you very much, Dr. Gambina. And Marcelo, I want to thank you too for participating with us in Telesur. Let's go to our next pause. Let's not forget that you have the question of the day, by which you can give us your opinion. United States consider that it's not probable that they're going to retake negotiations with China, just like they agreed in January. How much money will this imply for Donald Trump? Give us your opinion. We'll be right back. How about if we go over the main facts that have marked the commercial war that has been pushed by the United States against China? The commercial war, also known as the tax war against China and the United States, began in March 2018 when President Trump set standards, taxes for Chinese products, because he said that there were disloyal practice of commerce and that they were taking over intellectual properties. And as an answer to this, China activated taxing many products of the United States. The results of an investigation in the United States said that China was stealing intellectual property to the U.S. companies. This is why Trump decided to take his dispute to the World Labor Organization. And there were going to be even more taxes of importations of many products, among which batteries, agriculture machinery, and refrigerator. China imposed taxes on 25 new products. This is soy, orange juice, tobacco, basically many types of foods. This would give them over $50 billion. Then some days later, China would present to the World Commerce Organization some rules while they kept on taxing the Chinese. On the other hand, the government of the United States accused Huawei of cyber spying because they were using their secrets. However, of the inexistence of the proof, this conflict has unleashed an international boycott that threat any European companies for negotiating with the Chinese company. In the United States, what they did was make a list of the people who have worked with Huawei, and automatically they became the enemies of the country. Ever since 2019, China and the United States decided to establish agreements to stop the tax war. After several months, and the Prime Minister of China signed what is known as the de facto measure. Now, let's not forget that as soon as the COVID-19 erupted, the negotiations stopped, and the United States blamed China for being the main responsible of this disease. Let's continue with our analysis. We have Professor Ernesto Wong. He's a scholar and an expert. Thank you, Ray, for the opportunity. Well, I always recall my Chinese and Cuban blood, and now Venezuelan, for so many years that I've been working here. I find it very interesting, the geostrategy and geopolitical of everything that's happening in the world. And everything that's happening in the world, Professor, does it go back to 70 years of U.S. failure in this superpower of China? Well, yes, there are 70 years of continuous failures when the government of Mao Zedong kicked out Chiang Kai-shek, and his situation, which that he was able, they took him to Taiwan, whereas one of the points that come in the U.S. strategies to debilitate China. Well, yeah, there are a group of elements, because as I told you, historically, after what happened in the Chinese Revolution, that China gave support to North Korea, and they were able to fight United States. Then we have other wars like the Vietnamese War, Let's not forget that China, if they go through that route, if you see the map, it's going to be easier to go through the north, through the Bering Strait to the United States. So there is all of a historical background with China. What happens now in the last years? China has let go, has surpassed the United States in the spatial ambience. They have been able to create with their own knowledge. They have been able to create certain controls of contrary missions. They are creating a space mission. They are creating now they're creating new kinds of fuel, so their crafts can go easily to the moon. They are carrying out experiments that the United States has never been able to carry out. Well, on the other hand, let's not forget that the United States is doing everything possible to take over control. Now, let's not forget that in the midst of this, international organisms have considered space as a security zone for everybody. So what they're doing now is to contain the advance of this. I recall that the previous president announced in 2007, 2008, that in 3 years, they were going to be able to conquer the moon. That's what the Chinese said. If you have a scientific analysis to guarantee the presence of a man on the moon, they saw that they needed to make other steps. And this has this has risen in the U.S. In the U.S. Frame of mind. This is a point of dispute too. So a word that is seen by the two exceptions, it's not the same thing to conquer the moon said by the Americans or by the Chinese, because the Chinese want to investigate, and the United States want to go to the moon to take over the moon. So the response that everybody here answers. However, let's not forget that some say, well, China is also capitalist, so who cares? Some of them see that it's so simple. Well, as I told you, this is another failure of the United States, because when they are able to speak with Deng Xiaoping in '78, they were able to begin to introduce capitals in China, to think that they were going to direct the country with those capitals. However, just like Gambini said, there is a Communist Party with a lot of history and a lot of contact with the citizens, and they've been able to conduct all of the ways of their own. And they have also tried to evolve, and they have implemented many changes. Now, United States, in this sense, has been very ambitious, because after obtaining a number of resources in the 80s, what they did with the support that China had, with all of the profit it made, they want to go against China. So of course this has been an action of betrayal. Many sectors of the U.S. see it this way, because over 500 of the big companies of the United States have become powerful through their relations with China, because China is the factory of the world. And ever since Donald Trump reached the presidency, he cut all of the importations. And of course, this is one of the failures that they've had. And not only with China, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Russia. So of course, there are a chain of failures that they have had with China. Let's not forget that Europe, Asia Pacific, many of them have a great relationship with China. And this is how a series of operations can be explained, like what happens with Hong Kong and Japan. Do you think that it's true that COVID-19 is a weapon of war? Yes, I do. I do think that it's very easy, the manipulation of a citizen. And once they have done it, they can spread it. Even if it's not from original base, you can still spread it. China said just some time ago that it had been the U.S. who began. Let's not forget that many of the U.S. air carriers and boats are infested by COVID-19. Of course, this is a very complex reality, but it's important to make an analysis in the sense of how things are changing and how China is overcoming this problem. And they're doing it with success in the sense of reactivating the economy. And of course, to transport from Beijing to Europe through this route project, which this project will be not stopped by anybody. And now the United States appears with another law that tries to stop China. This is the blackmail of economy, of atomic use. So this is why the United States will go directly to the exile, because China does have several resources, and Trump is saying that he might take over them. He did it to Venezuela. He stole hundreds to Venezuela. But I think that in these negotiations, it's going to be harder. Well, United States and Trump always wants to prevail, no matter what the price is. That is why they are taking more measures, so China will go under what they want. And also what they want to do is to stop the movement of China. And let's not forget that China is the biggest factory in the world. And China had even announced the new Silicon Valley in China. And of course, all of the technological innovation were going to be centered there. So it was announced that China was going to be established there. And with that, Silicon Valley was going to lose all its money. And of course, we have confronted interests, one of mega companies that will take over everything. So there is a dispute there that has also been established. So to the degree that Trump is hitting China with things that he can use in the war, but this will bring contradictions with those who want to keep with the increase of increase their income. So it's a way of negotiation that this Trump group has based on pressure and blackmail. Let's not forget that if the United States is threatening with some limits that they cannot uphold, who's going to believe them? Because the United States cannot uphold these negotiations. Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for your explanation. Well, I hope to see you next time. Let's go to conclusions. Turns out to be very weird how the number of people affected of COVID in the United States. There is also more advertisement with no fundaments, just based on his media machinery against China, a country that, on the contrary, has shown visible results of coming back. Will the United States be able to overcome and to keep on establishing this hate against China? Let's see what happens. But it's not very probable that this administration will be reelected if they have not been able to manage the COVID. This is all for today. Thank you.